It all started in the small, shared kitchen of a non-profit office tucked into the heart of Boston. Claire Morgan had only been there a week, new to the job, still learning names, trying not to stand out. She was in her early 30s, smart, grounded, with a soft smile that made people feel comfortable. She'd moved to Boston after a hard breakup, ready to start over and focus on work. Ryan Carter, on the other hand, had been there for years. In his late 30s, he was the kind of man people respected, quietly, sharp with tech, quick to fix problems, but always keeping to himself. His presence had a calm weight to it, like he'd lived through a few storms and learned how to walk through them without saying much. Their connection wasn't love at first sight. It was something slower, more grown-up, built in the small spaces people often overlook. It began when Claire's coffee mug cracked, and Ryan, who had noticed her using it every morning, left a new one on her desk. No note, just a small post-it, thought this might help. She looked around the office, confused, touched, and strangely moved. It wasn't just the mug, it was the feeling that someone had noticed her. Really noticed. After that, there were small exchanges. A laugh in the elevator. A knowing glance during stressful meetings. He fixed her laptop without her asking. She brought him a blueberry muffin once, by accident. There was something warm and unspoken building between them, like the quiet pull of a tide. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. They both knew what they were doing, or not doing. Office relationships were complicated. Especially for Claire, who was in a leadership position. And Ryan had his own reasons to be cautious. He had been engaged once, years ago, before cancer took her. Since then, he had been careful with his heart, putting his energy into work, friendships, and late-night walks through the city instead of risking anything that could break again. But with Claire, something softened. He felt himself looking forward to her voice, her quiet jokes, the way her eyes lit up when she was passionate about a new campaign. She wasn't flashy or loud. She was thoughtful, steady, and she had sadness tucked behind her confidence, the kind you don't speak about, but recognize in others who've been hurt and healed the hard way. They didn't plan the first kiss. It happened one snowy night after everyone else had left. Claire had stayed late to finish a press release. Ryan was finishing server updates. She stood by the big window, watching the snow fall across the city skyline, lost in thought. Ryan walked up beside her, silent for a moment. "I think about you more than I should," he said, his voice low. She didn't turn, but her breath caught. "I know," she said. There was no resistance. No big declaration. Just a soft kiss in the quiet hallway, their faces lit by the glow of the exit sign. It wasn't reckless, it was tender. Careful. The kind of kiss that said, "I've waited for this, even if I didn't know I was waiting." They agreed, silently and then aloud, to keep it private. Just for now. No one needed to know. They told themselves it was better this way, professional, mature. But the truth was, they were scared. Scared of being judged. Of losing what they were building. Of getting hurt again. So they made a promise to keep it quiet. What they didn't know was, someone had seen them. And love, no matter how quietly it starts, has a way of being noticed. Claire and Ryan told themselves it was just a secret, something private, something theirs. But love doesn't stay hidden forever, especially when it's real. Weeks passed, and the moments between them grew deeper. Their conversations stretched into the night, sometimes over the phone, sometimes wrapped in blankets at Ryan's apartment, the glow of the TV ignored as they talked about everything: loss, hope, the future. Claire, who had once been guarded and always in control, started to open up. She told him about the man she almost married, how it ended with a slow, quiet heartbreak she didn't see coming. Ryan listened in the way women hope someone will, without trying to fix it, without turning it into something about himself. He simply stayed. And in that stillness, she began to trust again. At work, they tried to act normal. Claire led meetings like always, confident and clear, but Ryan could read the small changes: the soft smile she saved only for him, the way her hand brushed his arm when no one was looking. In the office kitchen, she'd casually pour him coffee when she knew he'd be arriving late. They were careful. So careful. No texts during work hours. No eye contact that lasted too long. But emotions don't follow rules. Not when something this real is blooming. Ryan, for all his quiet nature, was feeling again. He'd lived in emotional silence since losing his fiancée, going through the motions of life but never really living. With Claire, that changed. He laughed more. His eyes softened. He'd look at her in staff meetings and forget what he was supposed to say. It was the kind of love that crept in gently but settled deeply. And though he never said it out loud yet, he was beginning to know he couldn't go back to life before her. But people notice things. Madison, the HR manager, had known Claire since college. She wasn't the gossipy type, but she knew Claire better than anyone else in the office. And lately, something was different. Claire would smile at her phone, then quickly turn it upside down. She stayed a little later than usual, but always seemed happier leaving. Madison wasn't trying to figure it out, but she saw the shift of the warmth, the slight glow. One afternoon, while eating lunch on the rooftop terrace, Madison looked over at Claire, her expression soft. "You don't have to tell me," she said, her voice casual but kind. "But I hope he's worth it." Claire froze for a second, startled. She wasn't ready to talk about it. Not even to her closest friend at work. But the words fell out before she could stop them. "He is," she whispered. "But I don't know if we can survive being seen." That fear sat in Claire's chest like a weight. She wasn't afraid of love, she was afraid of what people might do to it. Would people whisper? Would they think she had crossed a line, being in a leadership role? Would Ryan get blamed? Or worse, would they be forced to choose between their jobs and this quiet, beautiful thing they were building? The harder they tried to keep it hidden, the more obvious it became to those who were paying attention. It wasn't the stolen glances or missed group events. It was the way they were changing, not in a reckless way, but in that unmistakable way people do when they're falling in love. The way she smiled more. The way he seemed more alive. You can't hide connection, not really. It lingers in the air. And while neither of them knew it yet, someone else had captured a moment that would soon change everything, because no matter how careful they were, love, especially the real kind, always finds a way to be seen. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't a mistake. It was just a picture, one moment, one glance, one quiet truth caught on camera. Claire and Ryan had spent the weekend volunteering at a local community event in Cambridge, packing food boxes for families in need. It was the kind of thing their nonprofit often did, and they'd signed up without thinking too much about being seen. There were other staff members there, plenty of cameras around for the organization's social media team. They were careful, like always. No hand-holding, no flirtation. But what they didn't realize was how much love can live in the eyes, how much closeness shows even in silence. In one photo, taken mid-laughter as Claire passed Ryan a box of canned goods. Their chemistry was impossible to ignore. He was looking at her, not just with amusement, but with a tenderness that only people deeply in love carry. And she, caught smiling up at him, looked like someone who felt completely safe. By Monday morning, the picture had been shared in a team group chat, harmless at first, just a post celebrating a successful volunteer event. But the comments came quickly, disguised as jokes. Cute moment between Claire and Ryan eyes, someone wrote. Another added, anyone else getting more than coworkers vibes? It wasn't cruel, it was just curious. But curiosity spreads fast. And by lunchtime, the hallway felt tighter, the stairs longer, the silence heavier. Claire felt it in the way people paused when she walked into a room, in the sudden drop in conversation that wasn't there last week. Ryan felt it too, at the copier, at his desk, even at the coffee machine. Something had shifted. They hadn't said a word, but the room already knew. Before the day ended, they were both called in. Separately. The tone was professional, calm, not accusing. Leadership wanted clarity, transparency, and appropriate boundaries. Claire sat stiff in the meeting, her hands cold in her lap. She had worked hard to be respected. She had never imagined that falling for someone could risk that. Ryan, in his own meeting, didn't deny anything. We didn't break any rules, he said plainly. We've been careful. We just didn't want it to be about gossip. We didn't want to be the story. They weren't told to end it. But the message was clear, this would affect how people saw them. Their roles. Their reputations. There was risk now. Real risk. That night, Claire drove home with her heart in her throat. She didn't cry until she pulled into the underground garage of her apartment building. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wheel, her eyes burning with frustration, fear, and sadness. But then, a knock on the driver's side window startled her. She looked up, and there was Ryan, crouched down, his breath visible in the cold air. I'm sorry, he said gently as she rolled down the window. I should have protected this better. Her eyes filled again. You didn't do anything wrong. He reached for her hand, warm against hers. I don't want to lose this. Not because people are uncomfortable with love. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then maybe we stop pretending it's not love. They didn't walk into the office the next day holding hands. They didn't make an announcement. But at lunch, Claire chose a seat beside Ryan in the open cafeteria. And when she placed her hand gently on his under the table, she didn't hide it. Some people looked. Others looked away. But no one said anything because in that quiet act, it was clear, their love wasn't a secret anymore. And the truth was, it never really had been. 2 months passed, and the air around Claire and Ryan began to settle. The office chatter faded, replaced by new topics, new distractions. The picture that once felt like a spotlight now felt like a distant memory. People adjusted, as they always do. Some coworkers kept their distance, unsure how to act. Others grew warmer, quietly supportive. But none of that mattered much anymore, because Claire and Ryan had stopped hiding. Not in a loud, showy way, but in small, meaningful ones. Claire no longer flinched when their eyes met across the room. Ryan no longer paused before texting her something funny during a long meeting. They'd created space for their love to exist. In the real world, not tucked behind hallway glances or after-hours kisses. And that shift made all the difference. They were still respectful, professional in meetings, focused on work, but everyone could see it now, something beautiful had grown between them, and it wasn't going away. Outside of work, their relationship bloomed quietly, deeply. Claire started spending weekends at Ryan's condo in South Boston, where the view of the city lights made her feel like she was living in a different chapter of her life, one she never thought she'd reach. She had always been the type to overthink, to guard her heart. But with Ryan, things felt safe. He had this way of listening that made her feel heard even in silence. On Sunday mornings, they'd cook breakfast together, eggs, toast, coffee, and play old records while she danced barefoot in the kitchen. Ryan, who once lived in quiet routine, now looked forward to every weekend like a kid counting down to summer. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. They took road trips to Cape Cod, Vermont, even just small towns an hour outside the city. They walked hand in hand, sharing quiet stories and stealing gentle kisses in the cold. Ryan told Claire about the guilt he used to carry after his fiancée passed, how he thought he'd never love again, not like that. Claire didn't interrupt. She simply held his hand tighter, her heart full, because she understood what it meant to lose something and still be brave enough to try again. They both did, but love isn't just about the good days. There were hard conversations too, about boundaries at work, about how to handle opinions from others, about the fear of losing themselves in something so big. They had nights where Claire pulled away out of habit, unsure if she deserved this kind of peace. And nights where Ryan questioned if he could let go of the past fully. But each time, they came back to each other, not with grand gestures, but with soft honesty. A hand on the back. A late night, "I'm sorry." A quiet, "I'm here." One evening, sitting on Ryan's porch with a glass of wine and a worn blanket between them, Claire looked out at the city skyline. The night was warm, and the breeze was soft, and it felt like everything in her life had finally slowed to the right pace. "I used to think love had to be quiet," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "That if it stayed small, it couldn't be taken away." Ryan kissed the top of her head and whispered, "But the best kind of love doesn't need to hide. It doesn't need to explain itself." They sat there in silence, watching the stars flicker over the city, feeling whole. Not perfect, not without fear, but whole. Because after everything, the secrecy, the whispers, the risk, they had found something honest. Something real. And that kind of love doesn't need approval. It just needs two hearts willing to show up, again and again, no matter who's watching. Love, once seen, doesn't shrink back into shadows. It grows. It roots. And in time, it becomes something you no longer whisper about, but something you live out loud.